We begin our journey far beneath the vibrant, noisy surface of ancient Rome, descending into the cool, silent core of the Flavian amphitheater. Tonight, we seek the secrets held by the Hypogeum, the vast, two-level subterranean network that was the beating, mechanical heart of the Colosseum. To stand on the arena floor today is to see the sky, to feel the sun, and to hear the murmur of ghosts. But to truly understand the spectacle, we must descend. We must trade the blue sky for perpetual twilight and the roar of the crowd for the quiet, chilling echo of water. Imagine yourself making this descent. You leave the bright, shimmering light of the arena floor, passing through what would have been known as the Gate of Life, a simple, rough-hewn archway that led downward. The stone underfoot immediately changes. Up above, there was sand, the arena, soft and absorbent. Down here, the paving is rough, uneven basalt, slick with centuries of condensation and the perpetual humidity of buried stone. Each step downward is a deliberate choice, a separation from the world of life, sunlight, and applause, into a world dedicated to preparation, confinement, and shadow. The air itself shifts. Above, the air was dry, dusty, and laced with the sharp metallic scent of blood and sweat. Below, the air is heavy, dense, and cool, carrying the faint, earthy fragrance of damp volcanic rock, old wood, and the lingering, intangible scent of confined animals and human fear. The noise of the Colosseum audience does not vanish immediately, but it is swiftly and brutally filtered. As you navigate the steep, shallow steps, the roar transforms. It becomes a distant, muffled vibration, a pervasive thrum, felt more in the soles of your feet than heard with your ears. It is the sound of an entire city standing on your ceiling, completely unaware of the intricate, dark universe supporting their entertainment. This thrum is the soundtrack of the Hypogeum, a relentless, low-frequency reminder of the world you have left and the terrible performance you are about to support. The light, too, undergoes a profound transformation. Outside, the sun was blinding, reflecting off the white travertine facade. Down here, there is no natural light at all. Illumination relies entirely on lamps, small flickering terracotta dishes filled with olive oil, casting dancing shadows that do more to distort than to clarify. These shadows are crucial to the architecture of the subterranean space. They elongate the forms of the narrow, segmented passageways, making them appear endless. They turn simple columns into looming monoliths and conceal the thousands of operational details, the ropes, the latches, the pulleys that made the Hypogeum function. In this environment, the eye is constantly fooled, and the mind is constantly unnerved. The stone is not flat, but alive with moving darkness. The sense of scale is immediately lost. Up above, the elliptical arena floor measured 83 meters by 48 meters, a clear and comprehensible space. Down here, the structure is a dizzying, three-dimensional maze. Imagine a stack of ancient stone blocks, 2 full underground levels deep, composed of 75 distinct compartments, tunnels that crisscross and interlock like a mechanical puzzle, and a central spine that runs the entire length of the arena above. It is a world of right angles and sudden steep ramps, a purely functional, utilitarian space where aesthetics were irrelevant and only efficiency mattered. It was built to move men, beasts, and scenery with silent, brutal speed. As we pause at the base of the first ramp, notice the stone itself. It is a mix of travertine, the same pale, porous rock used for the outer walls, and local tufa, a softer, dark volcanic rock. Over 2,000 years, the damp air has permeated this stone, giving it a cool, smooth, almost wet soap quality to the touch. This material is our silent witness. It has absorbed the sounds, the smells, and the emotional residue of every soul that passed through this darkness. The purpose of this space was singular, to ensure that when the spectacle began above, every surprise was genuinely surprising, and every death was perfectly framed by the light. The air remains heavy. There is no air circulation here except what is slowly pushed down the ramps and through the vent shafts. It is a slow, languid air that settles and holds the history, pressing it against your skin. This pervasive, almost oppressive stillness is the true voice of the Hypogeum. We stand now on the threshold of the forgotten arena where the real drama of the Colosseum was prepared in the deepest silence. We are about to explore the mechanisms, the men, and the myths that were sealed away below the arena. This is where the magic was made and where the darkest human and animal spirits waited for the light. The descent is complete. We stand in the cold, damp heart of Rome's greatest entertainment machine, ready to listen to the whispers the stone has kept for millennia. Having settled into the heavy, damp air of the lower levels, we turn our attention from the sensory experience to the stark reality of the Hypogeum's construction. This was not a natural cave or crypt. It was a marvel of Roman engineering, a meticulously planned machine designed purely for stagecraft. The scale of this operation required an architectural complexity rarely matched in the ancient world, all of it concealed from the audience above. The basic structure consists of a vast network of two main concentric rings of tunnels, connected by radiating corridors, all resting beneath the elliptical arena floor. The depth of this system meant that the lowest point of the Hypogeum was nearly 20 feet below the ground level of the city outside, sinking into the earth like the colossal foundation of a mountain. The walls of these corridors were lined with rough-cut stone, but the floor was a masterpiece of necessity. It was not paved to be walked upon, but to support the heavy, constant movement of men, materials, and machinery. Grooves are visible everywhere, worn deep into the basalt by the friction of ropes and the continuous scrape of heavy wooden carriages. Crucial to the entire operation were the ramps and the vertical shafts. The ramps allowed for the movement of large, heavy scenic elements. The massive painted backdrops, the constructed trees and artificial caves, and the immense structures required for complex mythological scenes. These ramps were built at specific, shallow grades, allowing human and animal power to haul scenery pieces weighing potentially several tons into position. They had to be robust, yet subtle, built to endure continuous strain
without fracturing or compromising the structural integrity of the arena floor above. The vertical shafts are perhaps the most chilling reminder of the Hypogeum's purpose. These were not ventilation shafts, but operational conduits. Every few feet around the central corridors, square or rectangular holes pierce the ceiling, leading up to the arena. These were the locations of the pygmata, the massive stage machinery, trapdoors, sudden lifts, and theatrical elevators designed to launch men, animals, and props into the arena with dramatic, instantaneous effect. There were approximately 64 of these trapdoors alone, and each required its own system of counterweights and release mechanisms, all manually operated from the dark below. The system of pulleys and counterweights is a narrative in its own right. Imagine the friction and the sheer labor involved. Every sudden appearance, every roaring beast that materialized as if by magic, was the result of coordinated human effort in the blackness. The ropes, woven from hemp and flax, must have been thick as a man's arm, constantly greased with tallow to reduce friction, yet still emitting a low, agonizing screech as they were strained past their limits. The pulley blocks themselves, made of iron or hardwood, required precise maintenance. A broken rope or a seized block meant not only a ruined spectacle above, but immediate danger to the crew below, who operated in narrow, high-pressure confinement. The central spine, or the crypta, is the spine of this mechanical beast. This long, deep central corridor runs along the major axis of the ellipse. It was wide enough to serve as the main thoroughfare for scenery and the crucial link to the external tunnels, which connected the Colosseum to the outside world, specifically to the Ludus Magnus, the main gladiatorial training school. The stone here is worn smooth, not by random footsteps, but by the relentless, purposeful flow of traffic, chariots, wagons laden with props, and files of men and beasts moving toward their fates. The logistics of an event were breathtaking. Before the show, the Hypogeum was a whirlwind of controlled chaos. Scenery had to be positioned for the morning's venationes, beast hunts, then rapidly swapped out for the midday executions, and finally replaced with the clean sand and central decorations required for the afternoon's gladiatorial duels. This entire process had to occur in mere minutes, requiring the crew, known as the servi or slaves, to memorize complex choreographies of movement in the near darkness. Their lives depended on perfect synchronization. A crew member moving a painted tree backdrop at the wrong moment could be crushed by a descending lift cage or gored by a caged beast being moved down a neighboring corridor. The noise of this operation, though muffled from the spectators, must have been its own form of terror. The rhythmic pounding of the pulley drums, the low grunts of the oxen or slaves hauling heavy carts, the constant clack, clack, clack of rigging being checked. All of this noise existed in a separate, dark symphony, a constant, anxiety-inducing backdrop to the silence of the arena above. The engineering was magnificent, but the human and animal cost of maintaining this magnificent theatrical engine was incalculable.
As we move deeper into the lateral corridors of the Hypogeum, The architecture shifts slightly. The passageways become smaller, more compartmentalized, and the air takes on a distinctly animal odor. A dense mix of straw, waste, and wild, concentrated adrenaline. We are now in the section dedicated to the menageries of the dark, where the wild beasts, or ferae, were held before their violent theatrical ascent. These holding pens were known as the carceres, small stone-lined cells built into the walls of the tunnels. They were strictly utilitarian, just large enough to contain one or two large predators, lions, tigers, bears, or even more exotic animals like rhinos and elephants for the brief period before the hunt, the natio, began. The construction here is heavier, rougher, built for strength and containment, not comfort or light. The walls are scored with claw marks, some ancient, some perhaps only hours old before the stone was replaced, silent testaments to the panic and raw power contained within. Imagine the atmosphere in these corridors hours before the show. The ambient noise from the crowd above is now more pronounced, a relentless drone that the animals could sense but not understand. This confusion, amplified by the confinement and the unfamiliar odors, pushed the beasts into extreme states of agitation. The carceres would not have been silent. They would have echoed with the low, persistent growl of lions, the panicked chuffing of bears, the rhythmic pacing of large cats, and the sharp, frantic cries of smaller, terrified prey animals brought in for the hunt. The stone absorbed the noise, but the air carried the vibration of the beast's sheer physical tension. The keepers and handlers, the custodes and bestiari, spent their final anxious hours moving among these cages. Their work required a lethal combination of courage and absolute precision. The gates of the carceres were thick, barred doors, secured by heavy iron bolts and chains, constantly checked and rechecked. The feeding system had to be managed through small hatches, ensuring the animals were fueled for the fight, but not satiated. The lore of the custodes is one of silent ritual. Many would smear themselves with specific, often foul-smelling oils or pastes, believing these odors would mask their human scent, or conversely, act as a spiritual barrier against the savage energy of the beasts. The transfer of the animals from their external holding facilities, the vivarium near the Colosseum, was a spectacle of logistics itself. Large animals were often moved at night or in the very early morning, hauled down the wide external ramps on rolling wooden platforms. This movement was deliberately slow, designed to keep the animals as calm as possible, though the process was inherently stressful. Once in the Hypogeum, the animals often refused to eat, the anxiety too high, the environment too unnatural. The lore of the captured beasts adds another layer of darkness. For the Romans, these animals were not simply entertainment. They represented the triumph of Roman civilization over the wild peripheries of the empire. A rhinoceros from Africa, a tiger from India,
or a bear from Britannia was a living symbol of Roman global dominance. But to the handlers, these creatures often took on spiritual significance. It was whispered that the most powerful animals carried the soul of a wild god or a vengeful spirit from the distant lands they were captured from. A handler who was killed was not just unfortunate. He had fallen victim to a spirit of the wilderness that Rome had failed to tame. This belief manifested in protective rites. Before a major venatio, it was common for the custodes to pour small libations of cheap wine or even water into the dust near the cage, offering a silent, superstitious prayer for the pharaoh's quick ascent, and more importantly, for their own safe return to the upper world. The darkness here intensified these superstitions. The shadows were not just an absence of light. They were believed to be hiding places for the spirits of the wild, waiting for their chance to escape containment and enact a final terrible revenge on their human captors. The animal cells are positioned strategically close to the beast lifts, the Hypogeums. This proximity was necessary for rapid deployment. The final moments in the carceres were perhaps the most chilling. The slow, grating sound of the lift cage being pulled into position next to the carcere gate, the heavy rattle of the final chain being pulled back, and the sudden, terrifying realization by the beast that its time for the dark journey upward had come. This entire world of tension, raw instinct, and human anxiety existed solely to ensure a dramatic, shocking entry onto the brightly lit sand.
Leaving the intense, adrenaline-fueled atmosphere of the animal cages, we move into the sections of the Hypogeum dedicated to the human participants. The gladiators, the condemned criminals, and the auxiliary performers. Here, the noise shifts again, replacing the guttural growls of the beasts with the quiet, resigned sounds of men preparing for certain violence. The gladiators rarely spent extended periods in the Hypogeum itself. They were quartered nearby, in the Ludus Magnus, the massive training school connected to the Colosseum by a long, subterranean tunnel. However, in the hours immediately preceding the afternoon games, they were moved into the waiting areas of the Hypogeum. These areas were not luxurious or well-appointed. They were small, cool, and functional staging cells designed for final checks, equipment adjustments, and the final psychological bracing before the terrifying ascent. Imagine these small, rough-hewn cells. They offered little privacy. The air would be filled with the pervasive metallic scent of newly oiled bronze armor and the sharp, coppery smell of the gladiators' sweat and preparation oils. Unlike the beasts, the gladiators understood the architecture of the noise above. They knew the meaning of the crowd's roar, the blare of the trumpets, and the specific rhythm of the execution drums. The sound was not a mystery. It was an hourglass, counting down their final moments in the darkness. The focus in these final minutes was on the rituals of preparation. The laniste, or trainers, and their assistants would move among the men, their voices low and measured. They would check the fit of the galea, helmet, the security of the ochriae, greaves, and the sharpness of the gladius, sword. These checks were not just practical, they were psychological anchors.
The repetition, the familiar weight of the equipment, and the constant low chatter provided a small shield against the crushing psychological tension. The lore of the gladiators waiting in the shadows is heavy with stoicism and fatalism. These men, whether slaves, criminals, or voluntary fighters, often adopted quiet, personal rituals. Some would spend their last minutes meticulously polishing a piece of armor, a form of meditation. Others would silently recite prayers to Mars, or, ironically, to Fortuna, the goddess of luck. The stone walls here, unlike those in the menageries, absorbed the sounds of whispered final thoughts, hushed confessions, and the steady, rhythmic breathing of men trying to impose calm on their racing hearts. Crucial to the final preparations was the use of light and shadow. The gladiators were deliberately held in the perpetual gloom of the Hypogeum until the last possible moment. This was partly for theatrical effect. The shock of emerging from complete darkness into the brilliant Roman sunlight was disorienting, but also partly for psychological control. The darkness isolated them, forcing them inward, concentrating their focus. The sudden rush of light upon stepping onto the arena was a physical and sensory assault, launching them instantly into the fight or the death that they had been silently contemplating. The condemned and the noxi, criminals sentenced to death, occupied different, often rougher cells. Their final moments were less about ritual and more about quiet, overwhelming despair. They would be dressed in simple, rough tunics, perhaps given crude weapons, or often none at all. Their ascent was not through the specialized lifts, but often through the same ramps used by the scenery, led in groups to their fate. The silence in their holding areas was the heaviest of all, a silence of resignation, punctuated only by the low shuffle of their sandals on the damp stone. The contrast between the silence below and the roar above reached its zenith just as the men prepared to emerge. In the minutes before the gates were thrown open, the subterranean noise, the rope handling, the gate checks, the last whispered commands would cease, replaced by an acute awareness of the massive, demanding sound of the crowd, waiting directly above their heads. The atmosphere would become thick, electric, anticipating the explosion of noise and violence. The lore of the hidden symbols persists in these staging areas. It is rumored that many gladiators, believing themselves touched by fate or destined for a legendary death, would leave tiny, almost invisible scratch marks, a single initial, a small symbol of their chosen patron deity, or a simple tally mark on the backsides of the stone blocks near the exit gates. These marks were not meant to be seen by the overseers, but served as a final, quiet assertion of their identity, a last conversation with the stone before they surrendered their lives to the roaring light. The rough texture of the walls today still holds the secret of these unrecorded farewells.
The engineering prowess of the Hypogeum was perhaps never more dramatically demonstrated than in its ability to manage massive volumes of water, creating the famed nomaki, or mock naval battles. This function, though disputed by some modern historians due to the structural complexity, is deeply woven into the lore of the early Colosseum. To achieve this, the subterranean network had to function as an enormous specialized drain and water containment system. The lore of the water is a lore of slow, massive, deliberate movement. Imagine the mechanics required to transform the dusty arena into a shallow lake capable of floating scale model warships. This required a deep network of subterranean water channels and gates, controlled by highly trained servi who managed the flow from external aqueducts, likely the Aqua Claudia. The water was brought in through massive conduits, then systematically released through gates onto the arena floor, which had to be perfectly waterproofed with a layer of clay and then protected by wooden planking. The process of flooding the arena must have been a magnificent, yet terrifying, slow spectacle from below. As the gates opened, the Hypogeum itself would have begun to fill with the immense rushing sound of water, a constant churning roar that replaced the crowd's muffled thrum. The crew working below would have to swiftly secure all equipment and clear the lower levels, working against the rising, relentless tide. The noise of the filling was a temporal marker, announcing that the land-based spectacle was paused and a temporary sea was being born above their heads. The law of the water extended beyond mere spectacle. It was believed that the waters used for the nomaki were sometimes ritually blessed or mixed with pigments to give them a specific supernatural quality. Stories circulated in the barracks that the water sometimes flowed in with strange deep-sea currents, bringing with it not just the ships of the mock battles, but the chilling spirits of drowned sailors from past Roman naval defeats. These tales reinforced the idea that the Colosseum was a place where the barrier between the living spectacle and the historical dead was momentarily dissolved. Beyond the water, the Hypogeum was essential for creating dramatic effects using fog, smoke, and sudden light. The stagecraft required concealment and revelation. Trapdoors and lifts were not always used to launch fighters, but to release billowing clouds of scented smoke or thick, disorienting fog, used to symbolize mythological events or to mask the swift, silent change of scenery. The mechanisms for creating this atmospheric illusion were simple but ingenious. Braziers of burning herbs, sulfur, or damp wood placed in specialized pits within the Hypogeum and vented directly through the pegmata openings. The crew had to manage these chemical reactions in the dense enclosed air below, risking smoke inhalation and sudden flare-ups. The air would briefly thicken with the odor of burnt frankincense, or more commonly, acrid sulfur, the classic scent of the underworld, perfectly deployed for a battle involving a mythological beast. The coordination of sudden light was equally complex. While the sun provided the main illumination, the Hypogeum crew was responsible for any artificial light effects. This involved using polished metal mirrors or large specialized lanterns positioned near the top of the vertical shafts. On cue, the crew would quickly remove a cover or pivot a mirror, sending a concentrated beam of artificial light, perhaps symbolizing a divine presence or a fiery weapon, onto a specific, focused spot on the arena floor. The control room for these light effects, housed in a specific, elevated corridor of the Hypogeum, was a place of high anxiety, requiring immediate, precise action in a fraction of a second to match the action above. The overall lore of the Hypogeum stagecraft is one of magical manipulation. To the common Roman spectator, the sudden appearance of a fully rigged ship, the instantaneous materialization of a forest, or the sudden blinding beam of golden light was viewed as a semi-divine feat.
They did not see the hundreds of servi pulling thick ropes, the low grinding gears, and the suffocating smoke below. They saw pure, inexplicable spectacle, reinforcing the imperial message that the emperor controlled not only men and beasts, but also the very elements of the earth and the sea. The subterranean structure was the hidden source of all illusion, the quiet, technical heart of Rome's manufactured mythology.
We now delve into the deepest layer of the Hypogeum's history, the realm of superstition, hidden rites, and the dark psychological energy absorbed by the stone. The constant proximity to death, combined with the extreme danger and the separation from sunlight, made the subterranean network a magnet for intense, quiet belief systems among the servi, the handlers, and the condemned. The darkness itself fostered this environment. Roman public religion was one of light, temples, and open rituals. Down here, the belief system was necessarily private, whispered, and rooted in the primal fear of the unknown. The stone tunnels were viewed as a liminal space, not quite the living world, but not quite the underworld either. It was the threshold of Hades, a temporary purgatory between life and violent release. One of the most persistent pieces of lore centered on the alignment of the tunnels. It was believed that the four main cardinal entrances were not just architectural necessities, but ritual pathways. Certain handlers would refuse to move a ferry or a condemned man down the east-west axis after dusk, believing this path was reserved for the procession of shades, the ghosts of those who had died during that day's games, returning to the underworld. They would insist on using the north-south corridors, even if it meant a longer, more difficult journey, to avoid crossing the path of the recently departed. The superstition of the lubricants is a fascinating specific detail. The pulley systems and traps required constant lubrication, usually with cheap animal tallow. However, some of the servi would secretly mix the tallow with herbs, rue, mandrake root, or even certain powdered volcanic ash, believing this mixture would appease the mechanical spirit of the machine, preventing the ropes from snapping or the heavy lifts from seizing up at the critical moment. The fear was that the machine itself had a malevolent will, capable of betraying them and ensuring their immediate death. There is substantial anecdotal lore regarding hidden charms and apotropaic symbols, symbols meant to ward off evil. Since the servi and many bestiari were foreign slaves, they often brought with them local deities and protective signs that were hidden from Roman overseers. Look closely at the rough joints between the stones in the deepest, least visited cells, and one might find faint carvings of stylized eyes to ward off the evil gaze. Small spirals or abstract shapes meant to invoke gods of protection from Gaul, Germania, or Egypt. These were not the formal carvings of a temple, but small, frantic prayers scratched quickly into the stone by men who knew their lives depended on more than just the strength of the iron bolts. The rites of the first blood were whispered about throughout the Hypogeum crew. It was a common secret belief that the machine demanded a small preemptive offering to ensure the day's spectacle went smoothly.
Though denied by Roman officialdom, certain handlers were rumored to perform a quiet ritual before the opening of the Venatio, involving the swift and clean sacrifice of a small, insignificant animal, a rabbit or a bird, within the deepest chamber. The blood was then supposedly smeared onto the main pulley mechanisms or the central winch drum, a literal appeasement to the spirit of the spectacle, ensuring the blood offered later in the arena would satisfy the demanding crowd and the deeper, darker spirit of the site. The psychological power of the dark was also key. For the condemned, the darkness was the final separator. Many tales persisted of men refusing to speak, believing that if they remained utterly silent, their spirit would not be trapped by the noise of the arena when they died. Conversely, some criminals would sing or chant loudly, often in their native tongues, a final defiant verbal act against the Roman silence they were being forced into. These final, often heartbreaking sounds would then be absorbed by the stone walls, adding to the low, intangible hum of historical tragedy. The entire subterranean network became a kind of reverse pilgrimage site, a place of ritual preparation for death, where personal beliefs superseded the official state religion. The air was charged with thousands of small, desperate prayers, whispered incantations, and silent acts of defiance. The enduring power of the Hypogeum's lore lies in this silent testimony. The knowledge that the glamorous, shining spectacle above was entirely dependent on the dark, fearful, and fiercely superstitious world of the unseen below. The shadows were not empty. They were crowded with the unseen beliefs of the forgotten.
The most iconic and complex function of the Hypogeum was the operation of the beast lifts, the Hypogeum. These were not simple trapdoors, but massive manual elevators, estimated to number around 32 in the final configuration, capable of raising heavy, roaring predators from the perpetual darkness of the basement to the blinding light of the arena floor in a matter of seconds. Tonight, we listen closely to the echoes of that vertical journey. Imagine the sheer physical and mechanical effort required. Each lift mechanism was a robust wooden cage housed within a stone shaft, operated by a complex system of ropes, capstans, and counterweights. The wood used, likely dense, slow-burning oak or olive wood, had to be replaced frequently due to the constant friction, the dampness, and the inevitable damage inflicted by the contained beasts. The ropes, thick and greasy with tallow, passed over massive wooden or iron winch drums, which provided the leverage needed to overcome gravity and the weight of the animal, cage, and operating crew. The sequence of a lift was a silent, frantic choreography. Preparation. The heavy, wheeled lift cage, or gubba, would be silently rolled out of its staging area and positioned directly beneath the correct opening, or pegma. Transfer. The cage would be aligned with the carcere gate. The final iron bolts would be withdrawn, and the bestiaris would use long spiked poles to coerce the terrified or enraged beast to move from its holding cell
into the lift cage. This was the most dangerous moment below ground. Securing. The heavy wooden top of the cage would be latched down, and the operators would secure the thick lifting ropes to the winch mechanism. The ascent. This is the journey we focus on. The chief operator would issue a quiet command, and the team of servi, often 4 to 8 men depending on the load, would begin to turn the capstan. The sound of the ascent for the crew below was defined by friction and strain. It was the low, agonizing groan of stressed wood, the high-pitched squeak of the ungreased parts of the rope rubbing against the stone shaft, and the thumping rhythm of the winch drum turning under tremendous pressure. This noise, unlike the crowd's roar, was internal, a mechanical sound of pure labor, concentrated in the narrow, claustrophobic shaft. For the beast inside, the experience was sensory overload. It went from the dense, damp, heavy darkness, often hours of near-total sensory deprivation, to a sudden vertical lurch. The air would change drastically, growing warmer and drier as it approached the sunlight. The noise of the crowd, previously a muffled hum, would surge into a deafening roar as the cage passed the level of the upper tunnels, assaulting the animal's sensitive hearing. The lore surrounding the lifts is filled with tales of betrayal and fate. It was whispered that if a winch rope broke, or if a cage jammed mid-ascent, it was not mechanical failure, but the will of the gods intervening, either saving the beast for a more glorious fate, or punishing the servi for some unseen slight. These jammed lifts were terrifying to the crew, as the snarling, thrashing animal was now trapped between the darkness and the light, its panicked state magnified by the sudden stop. Extracting the creature or repairing the mechanism mid-show was a high-stakes, nearly impossible task. The visual shock of the final moment must be noted. As the cage reached the arena level, the crew would swiftly activate a release lever. The wooden top of the cage would spring open, often hidden by a surrounding scenic element, and the animal, disoriented, panicked, and suddenly blinded by the glare of the Roman sun, would explode onto the sand. The visual spectacle for the crowd was one of instantaneous appearance, a moment of manufactured magic. For the crew below, it was the sound of the final heavy clank as the latch opened, followed by the immediate deafening noise of the animal's roar, mixing with the crowd's delight, signaling their part of the performance was done. The complexity of operating multiple lifts simultaneously, launching a pride of lions from 4 different points, or coordinating the ascent of a dozen deer, required a mastery of timing and communication achieved through silence. The Hypogeum was too loud with mechanical noise for verbal commands. Instead, commands were given through a complex system of lamp signals, whistles, or rhythmic tapping on the stone, with each sequence of taps meaning start, slow, or halt. This non-verbal communication was a vital part of the subterranean craft, forging a deep, silent bond between the crew members who relied entirely on each other's precise rhythm in the dark.
The true silence of the Hypogeum was not achieved during the performance, but in the long, exhausting hours after the final trumpet blast, when the crowd had gone and the work of redemption, the cleanup, and salvage began. This was the quiet, necessary reality that followed the spectacle. If a nauchimia had been performed, the first and most immediate task was the draining of the arena. This was a slow, massive, and noisy process, the exact opposite of the silent, precise movements required for the lifts. The water gates were opened, and the massive volume of water, now colored with pigments, blood, and silt, would roar back down into the channels of the Hypogeum and out into the main drains connected to the Cloaca Maxima. The sound of this rushing water would fill the entire subterranean space, a loud, washing noise that lasted for hours, cleansing the surface while simultaneously adding to the perpetual dampness below. Once the water was gone, or after a standard venatio or gladiatorial session, the work of removing the remnants began. This fell to the lowest class of servi, the cleanup crews. Their work was methodical, repetitive, and deeply symbolic. They had to descend into the arena, remove the bodies of the dead men and animals, salvage usable armor and weapons, and replace the blood-soaked sand, arena, with fresh, clean material for the next day. The removal of the dead was a silent, grim process. The bodies were often dragged through the porta libitinaria, the gate of death, which led to external cremation or burial pits. But many also had to be moved through the upper tunnels and sometimes down into the Hypogeum ramps if the external gates were congested. The silence of the cleanup crews was profound. They moved with a resigned efficiency, their sandals shuffling across the damp stone, their only tools hooks, ropes, and wheelbarrows. The work was non-dramatic, focusing only on the mechanics of clearing waste. The lore of the cleanup crews is one of necessary spiritual cleansing. It was whispered that the blood of men and beasts contained immense, wild energy. If the sand was not perfectly removed and the stone surfaces not scraped clean, the violent spirits would linger, potentially cursing the next day's events, or worse, haunting the servi themselves. The cleaning was therefore a ritualistic act of purification. They would use strong lye or specific salts to scour the ramps and the walls near the lift shafts, attempting to remove every trace of coppery, metallic odor and visible stain. The salvage of scenery was also a major undertaking. The massive painted backdrops, the trees, the faux rocks, and the theatrical mechanisms had to be dismantled and hauled back down the ramps for storage or repair. This involved the quiet, rhythmic sound of wood on wood, the slow turning of cartwheels, and the low, strained grunts of the servi as they carefully navigated the narrow corridors. The contrast was stark. The massive scenery that had looked magical in the light now looked heavy, mundane, and cheap in the faint lamplight of the basement. The low, constant noise that permeated these final hours was not human. It was the pervasive, rhythmic drip, drip, drip of water filtering through the stone and down into the cisterns. This was the sound of the earth reasserting itself, claiming back the moisture and the quiet that the day's spectacle had violently disrupted. This continuous dripping sound, constant yet irregular, served as a final monotonous lullaby to the day of violence. By the early morning, before the city began to stir, the Hypogeum would return to a state of functional inertia. The ramps were clear, the sand above was freshly raked, and the carceres were either empty or awaiting the arrival of the next batch of condemned beasts. The air would be clean of blood, replaced by the persistent, heavy smell of damp stone and a faint residual odor of sulfur
from the theatrical smoke. The silence was absolute, a quiet born of physical exhaustion and the heavy knowledge of what the massive empty machine was designed to do again tomorrow.
We conclude our quiet journey through the Hypogeum, preparing now for the final ascent back to the world of light and air. This final movement offers a moment of reflection, contrasting the silence of the ancient structure today with the profound, operative silence of its past. As we move up the steep ramps, leaving the deepest levels behind, the physical sensation of the stone shifts. The air becomes slightly less heavy, the temperature rises marginally, and the scent of damp earth begins to give way to the faint, cleaner scent of dust carried down from the world above. The shadows, still dancing from our diminishing lamplight, no longer feel oppressive, but rather like historical curtains drawing back. Today, the Colosseum is a ruin. The arena floor is mostly gone, exposing the skeletal structure of the Hypogeum to the sky. The silence here is a geological silence, the quiet of stone enduring the centuries. The wind moves freely through the empty lift shafts, and the sun pierces the depths, illuminating the tunnels that were once perpetually black. The drip, drip, drip of water is no longer a sound of perpetual maintenance, but a sound of decay and natural erosion. But the silence we experienced down below, the silence of the ancient machine, was entirely different. It was an enforced, active silence. It was the concentrated absence of human speech required for coordinated, high-stakes manual labor. It was the silence of men concentrating on rope friction, on the precise timing of a signal tap, on the gentle movement required to move a terrifying predator. That silence was heavy with human intention. Consider the contrast of sound. Then, the relentless, high-pressure noise of the audience above, juxtaposed with the low, constant groan of stressed wood, the squeak of the winches, and the thumping rhythm of the capstans. The silence was the absence of sound that mattered. No shouting, no careless noise that could alert a beast or ruin a theatrical surprise. Now, the murmur of tourist voices from above, filtered by the open structure, the sound of the wind. The silence is empty, peaceful, and passive. The lore of the stone's memory lingers most strongly in this final ascent. The materials used, the rough-cut travertine, the basalt, the tufa, were not smooth or refined in the way of a palace. They were porous, textured, and rough, designed for grip and utility. This roughness meant they were perfect for absorbing and holding the non-verbal history, the invisible scratch of a condemned man's final symbol, the residual of the ritualistic tallow and blood, the deep grooves worn by the passage of heavy carts. The stone surfaces were the final, permanent witnesses to the terror and the quiet dedication that made the spectacle possible. As we reach the former level of the arena floor, the light suddenly expands and the sky rushes in. The final memory we take from the Hypogeum is this architectural juxtaposition.
The beautiful, soaring arches of the upper Colosseum, reaching toward the imperial heavens, were only possible because of the cold, dark, utterly utilitarian precision of the mechanical labyrinth dedicated to death and illusion that lay beneath. The Hypogeum remains Rome's greatest metaphor for the spectacle. The shining, glorious, and loud surface was entirely dependent on the desperate, silent, and forgotten labor in the profound darkness below. The silence we hear there today is not just the silence of history, but the enduring echo of the deep, ritualistic quiet required to power the greatest entertainment machine the world had ever known. May the deep, slow echo of the stones guide you into a restful night.